Thanks so much for joining us on Cloudy with a Chance of podcast. I'm so happy to be back with McCall, and we're post Mother's Day, which in the Miami Valley, a lot of people use that as the clear to plant and get in the garden and, get everything ready. But this year's a little different for us because we are in a pretty cold little stretch here.
Yeah, we certainly are. And I know that I was just telling my neighbors just to hold off. They started to do those potted plants. But I said, just hold off on the garden planting at least another week, because not only because of the cold temperatures, but so much rain that even those early little seedlings or the seeds that you're putting in the ground are just going to bubble up from all the water that we've had.
Yeah, exactly. We were very, very wet on Mother's Day this year. Locally, we still have high water in spots as of, Monday morning. So, we see our fair share of severe weather, and whether it comes in the form of flooding or tornadoes, it definitely was a pretty big rain event for us for this year, at least. We haven't had a whole lot of severe weather at all this year, which, knock on wood, I'm not disappointed about at all.
Me neither, because we can remember 2 years ago, not too many weeks after Mother's Day, we had Memorial Day, and we had the tornado outbreak across the Miami Valley. And that actually is going to pivot into today's topic. I'm working on a new story that's going to follow up the 2 years since the Memorial Day outbreak across the Miami Valley, and not only how Miami Valley residents are dealing with the aftermath 2 years later, but the environment and the trees. We lost thousands of trees across the area, across the region, because of those 15 tornadoes. And I got connected to our guest today, and I'm super excited, Kirstie. I've already had a chance to talk to Grady. I was like, you need to be on this podcast. And I know by the end of this, you're going to be geeking out as much as I was geeking out after talking to Grady. So let me introduce Grady McGahan. This is the director of RETREET, of Keep America Beautiful, and he is partnering with the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission here in the Miami Valley to bring back the trees. And it is awesome. It's are not little teeny tiny baby trees. They are going to be pretty decent sized trees. Grady will tell us about where the trees are coming from, how this connection happened, and also what it's really going to do as far as changing the landscape in the Miami Valley. So welcome, Grady. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and for that great introduction.
You're welcome. I am so excited. But before we get to all the goods, because I thought this was also a little interesting nugget at the end of our conversation, Grady, you did not go to school to be a scientist, correct?
Oh, no, not at all.
Why don't you tell us?
Definitely did not imagine this path forward for sure, but I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we always love to talk with our guests about how they got to where they are, because, a lot of times we have scientists that are listening and think that they need to take the traditional way to get into environmental science or the weather or anything like that. So why don't you just give us a path rundown of how you got from point A to point B?
Yeah, for sure. And then before I do that, I definitely would clarify that I'm not actually a scientist. I'm more of a facilitator.
Of science. Yeah.
Yeah, of many things, but science surely is one of them. So, when I graduated from high school, I had my eye on international business, and I actually went to Georgetown in the business school. And about a year and a half into doing that program, realized that was not the path I wanted to take. Although it was open for me and I could have continued going down it, I thought, this just really isn't the line of study that I'm most interested in. It wasn't engaging me, and it wasn't the community that I wanted to be a part of. So I wound up pivoting, and instead of graduating with an international business degree, I wound up graduating with an English degree with international business, studio art, and history minors. So it was a very wide range of studies that gave me a pretty particular viewpoint. And when I graduated from college, I decided to move to New York City and get into film production. And that actually led me to documentary film production specifically. And it was over the course of working in documentary film for about 5 years that I came into the world of environmental nonprofits, because I started making documentary films, short documentary films, about several nonprofit organizations in the United States and the work that they were doing, most of which centered around trees. And these films, these short films, really were meant to advertise participation and sponsorship and donors. That, the idea was to create something compelling that would engage people who were not already aware of these nonprofits to get involved with their mission. And funnily enough, it dawned on me that if I wasn't able to convince myself to support the causes of these organizations and get involved with them, that clearly I was failing at producing this product. So that did lead me to supporting the organizations, and I got involved with their missions. And it was through the interaction with those communities over time that I kind of stumbled across this huge void in the disaster relief and recovery landscape, pun intended. And that is the replacement of trees following natural disaster. And really that spawned out of the opportunity to go to Bastrop, Texas, in the aftermath of a really intense and highly destructive wildfire that happened towards the end of 2011 that made international news, but it was big news, obviously, in Texas. It was right outside of Austin, and you could see the huge plume of smoke from the wildfire. I mean, it was hundreds of feet tall from Austin, and that is like, wow, it's right there. I wasn't living in Austin at the time, but I had a lot of friends that were. And it just became an obvious service opportunity. I had a lot of friends who were cyclists. They rode the MS 150 through the town of Bastrop. It was pretty well known. And we just had the idea of going down there to as cyclists really, but also as people who are interested in trees, to help and to do something that we felt was accessible to us. We didn't have any skills rebuilding houses or paving roads or anything else, but being familiar with the area, we thought a lot of these people surely moved there because of the trees, and we're interested in trees, and we could go down there and maybe plant some trees for these folks. And it was just in the aftermath of doing that event and having it be as successful as it was that the whole organization of RETREET was born. And that was 10 years ago, and here we are today. So I'm definitely looking forward to telling you what happened over those 10 years, at least to some degree.
Well, it's it's so awesome and exciting. Kirstie, I'll let you jump in there. I'm sure you have a million questions.
Well, I just think that I love that, like you said, what were some of the skills that you had? And, you're not going to build a house or repave, and then you came across like the need to do something as, I don't want to say as simple as planting trees, but what a necessary, duty to our environment, and something that was accessible to you. Mm-hmm. So I guess I just want you to continue on, because I'm sitting here going, okay, so it's born.
Well, yeah.
And go.
Sure. It actually is a lot more difficult to plant a tree than I think most people would assume. We very much surprise people when they come out on the program, to help us plant or to be a part of that. And I don't mean technically, I just mean physically. And I think that's part of the gift that we give, right? We can teach anyone how to plant a tree properly, but it is a significant amount of work to plant the sort of trees that we are, which are going to be 1.5 inch in caliber. That's anywhere from 6 to 12 feet tall, really, depending on the species.
Wow.
So yeah, it's not a tree that fits in the palm of your hand. And I think that just from the stock imagery of tree planting that we all have seen, or that regularly flashes across our screens, that is something that it's the caring gift of this tree that fits in my hand and I put it into the earth. Yeah. This is a tree that really the trees that we plant are going to require 2 people to move them, and after they've been planted, they immediately affect the landscape. So I think this is one of those light bulb, like aha, of course kind of conversations, because I've had it many, tens of thousands of times at this point, where you tell people, look, after a natural disaster rolls through a community, it destroys everything, right? The trees included. And all of these systems kick into place to rebuild the houses, to rebuild the roads, to replace the cars, all of the standard staples, which are very important, obviously, to move out of the emergency situation into a stable and safe and secure living environment. But beyond that, the concept of making it feel like home again, or completing the picture, which are very much phrases that we use when we think about kind of the conclusion of disaster relief. Neither of those things can be achieved until you address really, I don't want to say the most significant loss, but of everything that's been destroyed, it's the trees that take the longest to replace, because you can't simply rebuild an 80-year-old oak tree. You have to plant one and wait for decades. So for it to feel like home again, you have to be able to walk outside of your front door and hear birds and see something that's alive. If it's just a decimated landscape, That's first of all, it's unrecognizable as your neighborhood. No matter how much rebuilding you do, it's not. It doesn't feel like, you know, the area that you were used to. There's neighbors who probably have moved away, and you just look up and down the street, and all of those signifiers that, you know, visually that made it really recognizable as your street or your community are now gone. And so to address that, you know, obvious long-term situation for survivors, we thought, hey, there's a huge market of untapped labor, you know, people who want to go into disaster areas and help and do something. But when they're seeing it on TV, right when it's happening, there just isn't the opportunity to be of service for a lot of people. You know, they have to go to work tomorrow, they have kids, they don't, they're not a doctor, they're seeing an emergency situation and not having the certifications really to go there and help. And oftentimes if they do, they're very much treated kind of like just an extra set of hands. I mean, you're just here, like we don't need a bunch of people just here. We have a lot of those people who are just here and they're in the shelter over here, you know. So the idea was to really spread out that interest to help over the recovery process, not just the immediate relief, and tell people, look, you can make plans to come down here. We're going to put a program that's 6 months or a year away. You can put that on your calendar. You can save up some money to travel, and we will facilitate the rest. You just got to be in this park on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock or whenever it is, you know, and we're going to teach you how to plant trees. And we're going to just send you out there and connect to the community and plant the trees, which really is making an investment in the community, because those trees are going to be there and they're going to grow over time. So you make an impact that has long-term significance, which is very different to the other kind of untrained opportunities for service in the disaster relief landscape, which primarily revolve around, you know, handing out like blankets or food, cooking meals. That's all very important, and it's not to be denigrated, but it also is just, you know, it has a particular moment in time, and that's typically, those goods are typically consumed, and then we move on to the next moment. Whereas a tree, you plant the tree, you have that moment, but then every day the person walks out of their front door, they see the tree, they think of you, you know, you have that long-term connection. And time again, we've had volunteers who have made that connection to the community, but also to the people in it, and have formed friendships. And I mean, I can't tell you the joy it brings me when I get a random text and it's some volunteer from 4 years ago who happens to be back in the town where we planted trees, and they're with some family that they planted, and they're, you know, taking a picture of themselves. I mean, it's just like I get goosebumps thinking about it, you know, connecting people to each other and to places like that.
Well, you spoke about that when we talked, the emotional attachment that people have with trees. You don't really think about it until your tree is missing. Things like, you know, you planted them when your baby was born, or you take your prom pictures in front of this tree. These trees have been there. You know, sometimes families live in the same home for, you know, multiple generations. So when the tree is gone, that memory is gone, and that's just one home. But then you think about all of the trees in a particular neighborhood being gone, and that emotional attachment that you don't think about until they're gone. But what I really liked is the number of trees that you will bring back to a neighborhood. So just imagine you've gone through this trauma, all your trees are gone, and then Grady and RETREET comes in. How many trees are you bringing back into a particular neighborhood? And how long does it take you to bring all those trees in?
Yeah, absolutely. The description you just gave, that the connections that people feel, that is real. And as you mentioned, it's not something that really is totally understood on the front end. And it's not that the memories are gone, it's just that they're not able to continue being made. You know, it's something that moves into the past. And so it's really experienced as a loss and as a permanent loss. And there are so many examples of that, you know, like you were saying, you know, like my grandfather planted these trees when he bought this house or built this house. And people have all these moments they can imagine and remember their family interacting in and around trees, or they built a fort in it, or had a tire swing there, or, you know, 4th of July picnics, or took pictures in front of their growing children every year in front of the same tree to track their progress, much like you do when you know, make markings on the wall of the door frame in your house. I'm sure many of you did that as I did as a child. But so the way that we construct the program, we focus on the re-landscaping in a way that is dramatic. So it's very noticeable, as opposed to piecemeal over time. You know, it's kind of like when you start an exercise regimen and you look in yourself in the mirror every day and you don't really notice the change. And then you see someone you haven't seen in 6 months. I'm like, wow, you look fantastic. It's the difference that you create. It's the same process, but by experiencing it all at once instead of over time, you create a much more intense and excited reaction. And so again, the way that we construct the program is we will work everything out ahead of time with a significant number of you know, homeowners or families, where we'll set up, you know, 100, 125 plantings that will all occur in a Saturday afternoon, typically over the course of about 4 or 5 hours. So we'll gather 200 people. And of course, this was pre-COVID and going forward, COVID allowing, but we will gather a large group of people. We will teach them how to plant trees. We will all plant trees together as a group in a central location. And then we will break everyone up into these evenly distributed smaller teams that we send out to home sites. And we'll send out, you know, 15 teams, and they're each planting 10 to 15 trees at, you know, I mean, 6, 7, 8, 10 home sites. And so every every half an hour, you have 15 trees going in the ground in a community. Again, these are trees that can be 10, 12 feet tall. So at the conclusion of 5 hours, and you've planted 150, 200 trees in a community, anybody walking down the street or driving down the street, or just, you know, again, looking out their window and seeing teams of people all over the place planting trees, when that's happening, it's very exciting. And afterwards, it's a dramatic change to the landscape that is felt. Yeah. And, you know, and that's instead of, you know, say that we're doing it 1, 2, 3 trees at a time, a truck and trailer just rolling around planting a couple here and there and doing one-offs. I mean, people would see them happening, but when there's that flash change, it really, it's a turning point for a lot of people. And typically at the end of a planting, we will host a community dinner where we invite all the people for whom we've planted the trees, and the volunteers, and, you know, sponsors and partners and other members of the community. And we celebrate that day with a free meal, food, drinks, you know, anybody who wants to come. But not only that day, which infuses those trees with one of those special moments that we began this portion of talking about, you know, when I was married or when my child was born. Certainly it's not a moment of that level of significance, but it is highly significant when it was that day that 150, 200 trees showed up in our community, and all these people from around the country came to be a part of it. And we had that joyous celebration. It makes the trees that we planted seem more special than just a tree that was planted. It was one of those trees that was planted. And so we get a higher buy-in from the folks who are receiving them as far as long-term care goes, we think. But then also we can come back and see all of those trees from that day, and they again are sort of imbued with that special quality of having a moment associated with them.
I mean, that is going to be so special. And like you said, in one afternoon, all of a sudden, a neighborhood that was just, you'd look out and see, you know, nothing, or just houses kind of going back up, will now have their green life back. I would assume that that's a lot of work on your end for Retreat to actually like organize this. And like you said, these aren't seeds, these are large trees. So I'm curious, like, where did the trees come from? And maybe that's just, I have no idea. How do you get like a somewhat mature tree and then transport it to Dayton, Ohio?
Yeah, it is an incredibly significant amount of work, and most of that happens in a cave, you know. Nobody sees any of that work. They just see it happening, and the impression of how much organization it must have taken to be experiencing this moment. I think that really is felt understood by a lot of people. We do not bring trees to Dayton, so we don't have a centralized hub in, you know, Washington State or something. I'm actually based in Dallas, and that's where I'm speaking to you from today. But we don't have like a production facility located in one area and ship trees all over the country like Christmas trees. We are really more looking to source native trees, I should say, specifically, and source them as local to the planting site as possible. So we have a bit of an equation there. And first of all, say that we rely heavily on local partners. Our goal as a nationally operating program of the largest community improvement nonprofit in the country is not to come in and as kind of a, you know, a single entity, just execute everything and shut everyone out, and have the process be so standardized that we're just, you know, pumping the same product into every area that we're serving. It's really to come in with a programmatic model that it has a lot of expertise behind it, but then to engage all of the local partners that can inform that model. So think about it as an equation. We have a specific outcome that we're looking to get, and we have certain constants within the equation, but then we have a lot of variables as well. And those variables are things that we would present to local partners and then rely on their knowledge to plug in to make sure that we arrive at the appropriate outcome. And those kind of things are what are the best native trees to plant in this area? What's an approved species list? Where are the good nurseries locally to get those kind of trees? Who should we speak to? You know, and then we will basically take that list and we'll go to the nurseries and we will look and see what species of the ones that we should plant do you have available in the size and quantity that we need to be able to execute a planting of this scale. And we'll kind of refine and comb that over time to get the list that we're going to have to offer the families who request trees from us. But then it doesn't stop there. You know, after somebody requests a tree and we determine which date we're going to be planting for them, we have the utilities marked. We send out an arborist to the home site to meet with the family so they can talk about the specific biodiverse mix of native trees that we have available, and they do a site assessment, and together the family and the arborist will choose proper planting locations based off of a number of factors. You know, the proximity to the home, the sidewalk, you know, where the utilities are, what kind of tree it's going to be in terms of how big will it get. Is it going to be a flowering ornamental and it should go out your kitchen window? And, you know, kind of, you know, in this area where a larger tree shouldn't be placed, is this tree going to feed migratory bird populations? Is this tree going to, you know, X, Y, and Z, all these different things. We're really trying to make sure that we plant the right tree in the right place, the right way, at the right time. And the right time is not just the right time of year, which clearly is a focus, but it's also the right time for the community and also the individual who's receiving the tree. So we don't say this is the day that we're planting trees and you're either ready or you're not, and sorry, you know. Right. We make multi-year commitments to a community, and we do our best to facilitate all the requests that we receive over time, so that if somebody, you know, everybody experiences the aftermath of a natural disaster differently, and some people's processes are going to take much longer than others. And we need to make sure that we're not just being of service to the people who potentially were able to get back on their feet the quickest right. for whatever reason. So, you know, there's a lot of thinking that goes into that. Yeah, there are a lot of logistical challenges. But again, that's the model that we've perfected over the past 10 years. And we can come in and say, hey, look, if we want to do a planting of this scale, you know, these are the lessons that have been learned. These are the things that we should do. And to shorten the process and to get a lot of you know, people in the game, we engage with tons of local partners. And I should say, you know, for this particular planting, the Dayton Foundation and AES really have stepped up big time to help us bring this to the Dayton area. AES in particular right now is running a one-to-one matching campaign. So if you go to the Dayton Foundation's website and you find the Miami Valley Tree Covery Campaign Fund, which is the name of the program, Miami Valley Tree Covery Campaign, and you make a donation there, it will be matched one-to-one by AES up to a contribution of $50,000 total. So that's really exciting. You know, we obviously couldn't do that or couldn't make the level of impact that we want to make without the funding from groups like that. So it's our commitment to Dayton metro area. We intend to plant along the path of the tornadoes. So that's moving from west to east.
Okay.
And over the next 2 years, hopefully we'll be able to get the work done in that time. And our intention is to plant about 1,000 of these trees in that time, which definitely it is a fraction of the amount that were lost. But, you know, if you're planting 1 or 2 trees per home, that's 500 families that you could, or at least in the area.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an instant impact. And because it's in the neighborhoods themselves, you know, these are areas where people live. So to just all of a sudden have trees is a great impact. Of course, we lost tree canopy in between neighborhoods, and it'll take some time for that to regrow on its own and regenerate on its own. But I think where we live mentally will be a great impact. And I know that because like you said, it's over 2 years, so there will be a big planting in the fall of this year and then next spring. And then I think the following fall. And as you mentioned, Grady, it'll go from west to east pretty much in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, and it may even extend beyond that, need and funding related. And I should say, you know, one of the tagline for RETREET is redefining disaster relief. And I think that we've done that today, and then in many instances by just bringing up this need for trees, right? But we also need to address a little bit of the concept, as we did earlier, in terms of what a tree is and planting them. Because something that's really important, I think a major differentiator between our program and many others, outside of the fact that we're the only organization in the world actively planting trees in the post-disaster landscape, you know, and engaging volunteers to do that and trying to make it part of the standardized response to natural disaster within urban and semi-urban areas specifically, is that this isn't a numbers game. You know, we're not trying to talk about, oh, we're going to plant like 10 million or 5 million. It isn't about millions and how many trees, you know, because when you're talking about numbers that big, you're not talking about the size of tree that we're planting. You're talking about you know, a tree, which is really a sapling, you know, 6 inches tall, something that does fit in the palm of your hand. And the survivability of planting millions of trees like that, that's really important that we get across, that we aren't stepping into the situation to talk about as many trees as we can get, like in terms of a number. We're looking at what is the best way to serve the community, you know, like how can we actually impact people's lives? It's not about having a press release that says, oh, we planted, you know, 20,000 trees, or we gave them away. You know, giving trees away, I can't tell you how many times we've gone to someone's home to actually plant the trees that we're bringing to give them, and they take us around the, you know, the backside of the garage, and there's this little family of forgotten trees that have been given away at other events. And like, oh, can you plant these for us too? You know, I mean, people will go and take them, but that's not where, you know, that doesn't mean the tree is actually being planted, right? I mean, where should I plant this tree? Like, how do I plant this tree? Like, do I leave? There's many ways in which it doesn't get taken to fruition and doesn't turn into long-term sustainability or survivability of the tree. So we're really, you know, addressing all of those things. It's a difficult process, like you said. It's a lot of logistics. It's much harder to go out and coordinate 125 plantings to take place in 5 hours than it is to pull up a truck in a parking lot and just hand trees away to people. And, you know, well, you know, the numbers were bigger and they went out there, but we really want to make sure that we are interacting with people. And another big piece of this actually is that, you know, a lot of folks, especially a year, 2, 3, 4 years after a natural disaster, when we'll still be planting trees, for example, in Dayton area, feel very forgotten about by the, you know, general public, certainly, but even by other people in town who weren't affected. You know, I mean, and by 2022, if you weren't directly hit by the tornado, it's not really going to be something that is present in your mind. And I can tell you that being here in Dallas, where we had a tornado also in 2019, and the people who were in recovery from that are very deep in it. And everyone else in Dallas is like, that was before COVID. I mean, I don't even remember the world back then, you know, it's completely out of their mind. So having volunteers come in and actually do the work of planting larger trees and coordinating all of that for someone and showing up and being present in their life and hearing their stories and being willing to talk to them about that and just sort of bringing that excitement and that hope. It's not just the trees. It's the interpersonal connection of feeling like somebody is still thinking about me. They've recognized something that I've been thinking about every day. I walk around my neighborhood and just see stumps. They figure that out. They put together this whole program and they're here just doing it for me. That is such a huge relief for folks that it's all they need to do is water the trees in the long term, right? And you know, I'm a very passionate person. I could talk about the program specifically forever, probably. Also with having an English major, you know, coming up with pages and pages of writing to say the exact same thing in many different ways. I have no issue with that. But I do want to just kind of generally say that, what led me down this path was in between making documentary films in New York and coming back to Dallas and executing that planting in Bastrop, which became the organization of RETREET. I spent about 18 months traveling around the world by myself, living out of a backpack. And in that time, and really in coming back from that time, I should say, because when I got on the plane and I bought a round the world plane ticket. When I got on that first flight and started traveling, I was kind of filled with a sense of, what am I going to get out of this? And like, what are the lessons that I need to learn? And I was really thinking internally, and I had a guy about 3 weeks into the trip sit me down and say, hey man, you need to stop thinking about yourself and start looking around at the world that you're moving through and just, focusing on the input. Like allow all of this to come in, and don't be thinking about like what's going to happen when you get back and the blog that you need to write and the photos you need to upload, and you're going to miss so much. And so I really did that. I became a sponge and just kind of let it all go. I did have a blog actually. It's called Around the World in Grady Days. You guys would probably really appreciate that.
Nice.
With your pun as well. So I did let it go, but which was great. But the problem was in coming back to the U.S., where I think our society has a tendency to see things like, giving up on your career, not giving up, but like pivoting out of a successful career, because things were going really well for me in documentary film. I just didn't want to continue down that path either. So at 27 years old, being like, well, I have a successful career, but I'm going to just take a minute and just travel around for a couple of years and soak it up. That was not seen as a valuable experience in and of itself, unless it led me to some purpose, like grad school or whatever else on the back end, But when I came home from that, there was a lot of pressure after the first day or two of being home and everyone being like, wow, like, what was your favorite country? And well, the standard questions I'd get, be like, well, what are you going to do now? I'm like, I just got off the plane 2 days ago. I'm exhausted, I haven't thought about it. Like, give me a couple months. But there's this real pressure to kind of distill all of that as if I had, it was Moses coming off the mountain. Like, well, what
I'm gonna have all this
what's
knowledge,
the lesson, man? Like, what's the lesson? Like you went out and did it. Like, tell us what we should know. And I didn't like actively or consciously really set about doing that work, but I did realize that having seen all the things I'd seen and looking at people and the way they were living their lives in just vastly different ways, but sort of underlying threads that connect us all, led me to feel that what I wanted in life was to be a part of a vibrant and robust and diverse community of people, and do work that affected them positively, and to be seen for that and respected basically for doing that work and feel valuable, like being there. And that's something that I just hadn't gotten in any of the other situations I'd been. There was very much this attitude in New York, especially, that's, you may be here in this important job, but if you don't want to do it or you don't like it, there's 20 people waiting for your job. There's always this it's not about you. It's just you the person who happens to be here. And I don't want to present that in some kind of self-centered way, but it's just the idea was, well, if anyone can do this job, I'm like, why does it need to be me?
Yeah.
There's something more specific for me out there. And so that really is at the heart. It's the reason why we do so much focus on the community and on the connections between the volunteers and the people that they're serving, and the community dinner, and just heightening all of those moments, because I think that we really are thirsty for that in the increasingly digital worlds in which we live that are very segmented, especially. And I think that was a very powerful experience for RETREET coming into COVID and the post-COVID landscape, starting with this planting in Dayton at the end of September. As we plan to do it, hopefully we're able to pull that off in the time that we want to, again, COVID dependent. I think that when we're all at that event on the tail end of planting all of those trees, the standard, exuberance that follows a retreat will be present, but also, the ability to come together and experience that, having been so isolated for the past year and a half, it's going to be such a crescendo. I personally just can't wait to be planting trees in Dayton.
Well, we are so excited, and it's certainly going to be a celebration here. And as I told you the last time we spoke, I hope to come and join in on the celebration at the end of September. You know, Grady, Kirstie and I could talk to you forever about this kind of
Part
stuff.
two
And
coming soon. Part two.
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Once we get this first
Definitely a
round of
follow-up.
trees, yeah, when the trees get in the ground, we are going to do a follow-up. So be sure, if you are a subscriber for Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast, that you look for our updated podcast episode with Grady as we head into perhaps October, November timeframe. It'll be really exciting to celebrate that. Grady, we have to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are new to Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast, thank you for listening to this episode. You can go back and listen to others. Be sure to subscribe, download wherever a podcast is available. We're also going to put the video version of this podcast online on WHIO.com. And also, if you have any streaming devices like Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.